The worker inspecting the crack was horrified to discover that the ground beneath his feet was shifting. If the tremor lasted more than 3 seconds, the chance of a magnitude 8 earthquake in this area would jump by 60%. Luckily, just as the man was panicking, the shaking stopped. Looking at the calm canyon in front of him, he let out a long sigh of relief. But just as the two were about to leave, the mountain on the north side of the canyon began to loosen. This isn't a movie, it's based on a true story. This geological disaster took place in Norway's Geirangerfjord. A tectonic plate shift triggered a magnitude 8 earthquake, which in turn caused a massive tsunami over 100 meters high, devastating an entire town. In 2015, director Roar Uthaug adapted the event into the film The Wave. Our story begins with a farewell. At the Geirangerfjord Geological Monitoring Station, geologist Christian arrived for work as usual. Today was his last day at the site. Tomorrow he'd be transferred elsewhere. To bid him farewell, the station chief decided to throw a barbecue party. But while everyone was chatting about what to grill that evening, Christian noticed an anomaly. The groundwater levels at 2 monitoring points were off. The station chief went to investigate but didn't find anything unusual. You see, the Geirangerfjord lies on a fault zone with intense geological activity. Even slight plate movement could trigger an earthquake. To ensure real-time monitoring and early warning, Norway had already built a dedicated observation station there. Thinking it was just a malfunction, the station chief decided to send someone to check the instruments the next day. Christian didn't think much of it and headed home. But on the way, he noticed water seeping from the rocks along the road. That immediately raised alarm bells. He rushed back to the station and reported his findings. Geirangerfjord typically has an extremely low underground water level. There shouldn't be any water seeping at all. If it was, the only explanation was a change in underground pressure, and the most likely cause of that pressure change was a tectonic shift. After hearing Christian's theory, the chief remembered the missing sensor. If the plate movement had severed the detector's cable, the consequences could be disastrous. To ensure safety, the chief sent a team to check the area where the device had gone silent. Christian and his colleagues soon arrived at the site. They opened the protective cover and followed the cable to inspect it. After a few minutes, Christian found the breakpoint. As expected, the instrument had stopped working because the cable had been severed. He rushed back to the station with the damaged cable. Analyzing the damage, Christian suspected that the tectonic plates had shifted significantly in a very short period. He proposed taking immediate action to evacuate the town below to prevent a large-scale geological disaster. But after hearing Christian's analysis, the chief thought he was overreacting. After all, this was an active fault zone. Plate movement wasn't exactly rare. If they issued an evacuation order too hastily, it could cause widespread panic. Plus, the area was in the middle of peak tourist season. There were tens of thousands of people in town. Evacuating them would cost over $100 million. So, the chief decided to drill for data first to confirm the extent of the shift before taking action. But Christian felt that might be too late. He suggested collecting data while beginning the evacuation at the same time. In fact, the northwestern cracks in the fjord had already been shifting by several centimeters per year for some time. Based on simulations, Christian calculated that if the displacement exceeded 5 centimeters, 1/3 of the northern mountain would slide into the sea. Millions of tons of rock would generate a tsunami over 100 meters high. Though the chief knew the prediction was serious, he still couldn't bring himself to make the call. He insisted on drilling first. The two argued over whether to issue an alert. In the end, the chief compromised. He deployed the entire team to monitor the cracked area in real time. Fresh data would arrive in about 4 hours. If Christian's theory proved correct, they could still issue the evacuation order then. Christian agreed to the plan. Since he had to pick up his kids, he left the station early. He brought his daughter home, packed their luggage, and prepared for their early flight the next morning. Meanwhile, new data was coming in. But when the chief and his staff saw the data on the screen, they were stunned. Theoretically, the mountain should be sloping downward due to gravity, but the data showed the cracks were actually closing by 3 centimeters. It was as if someone had pushed the leaning mountain back upright. In his 40 years of geology, the 39-year-old chief had never seen such bizarre data. Suspecting a fault in the equipment, he ordered a recalibration, but after several rounds, the data remained the same. Realizing something was wrong, the chief personally went to the crack zone with his assistant. But just as they began their descent, the mountain suddenly shook. Fortunately, the tremor didn't last long. Once things settled, the chief checked all the instruments. There were no errors, but if the data was accurate, how could it make sense? At that moment, Christian also felt the tremor. He called the station to find out what was going on. When he learned that the cracks were closing, he immediately knew something was very wrong. He told his assistant to warn the chief to evacuate and issue an emergency alert. It turned out that the reason the tilted mountain was closing up wasn't because of faulty data. It was due to a roly-poly effect caused by the tectonic shift. Imagine an unstable roly-poly toy. If you hit its base, the top rocks in the opposite direction. But once the stress is released, it falls toward the heavier side, with even greater force than before. In other words, the cracks closing was just the release of built-up stress. Once it was fully released, the mountain would collapse under the rebound force. But before Christian could finish his warning, disaster struck. Just as the chief was about to leave, the cliff beside him began to violently shake. Before he could react, a massive boulder fell and crushed his assistant. The chief tried to help, but when he turned, he saw the cracks on both sides were rapidly closing. Back at the station, the staff also detected the abnormal tremor. That momentary quake from the shifting plates registered a magnitude 8. The alert was immediately triggered. As the alarm blared, residents were jolted awake. Fortunately, the crack zone was dozens of kilometers away. The earthquake itself wouldn't reach the town, but it could trigger a landslide, which meant a tsunami. Residents wasted no time and began evacuating immediately. But just as the evacuation was underway, the unstable mountainside gave way. Millions of tons of rock crashed into the river, unleashing a monstrous wave. The station received the tsunami warning instantly. The wave would reach the town in 10 minutes. In town, Idun, Christian's wife, was organizing the evacuation when she got a call from him. Christian told her to take their daughter and go. The hotel had a bus to bring guests and staff to the shelter. Christian didn't hesitate. He took their daughter and headed for higher ground. But when they reached the base of the mountain, they hit a traffic jam. With the countdown ticking, Christian couldn't wait. He grabbed his daughter and started running uphill. As he ran, he warned others along the way. When people saw the giant tsunami in the distance, they froze in fear. On the evacuation route, one woman got stuck when the car ahead of her wasn't properly parked. Christian couldn't leave her behind. He handed his daughter off to a bystander and went back to help the woman. But her leg was injured. She couldn't run. As the wave drew closer, Christian had no choice. He pulled her into a car and fastened their seatbelts. Meanwhile, at the hotel, Idun realized her son was missing after evacuating the guests. She searched everywhere but couldn't find him. With time running out, she nearly gave up. Then, passing by the basement, she noticed the door was open. She went down and found her son playing with a skateboard. Without a word, she grabbed him and rushed to escape. But by the time they reached the exit, the bus had already left. With a 100-meter wave bearing down on them, Idun, her son, and 2 stranded guests froze. With no better option, she led them to the hotel's underground shelter. No one knows how long passed, but eventually, Christian woke up from unconsciousness. The woman he saved hadn't made it. He stumbled out of the car, only to see the entire town reduced to rubble. Then he spotted the hotel's bus. He broke in, only to find that all the passengers had died. Frantically, he searched for his wife and son, but found nothing. In the shelter, Idun and the others were trapped. Water was pouring in and the space was shrinking. She tried opening the door, but it was blocked by debris. Just then, she heard knocking from above. It was Christian. He had returned to the hotel after finding no sign of his wife on the bus. Frustrated, he had begun banging on the pipes. Hearing the sound, Idun realized someone was trying to rescue them. They banged back on the pipes to attract attention. Hearing the response reignited Christian's hope. He followed the sound and found the shelter door. Even though he didn't know if it was his wife inside, he couldn't ignore it. He dove into the water and cleared the stones blocking the door. The moment he saw Idun, he was overwhelmed with emotion. Thanks to him, everyone trapped inside was rescued. Just as the family left the shelter, the emergency team arrived. Because the alert was issued in time, most of the town's residents escaped to safety on the mountain. Sadly, some still lost their lives. That's the entire story of the disaster movie The Wave.